Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is such a privilege and honor to introduce our inaugural speaker for the Rochester Equity and Access Leadership Conversations, Dr. Amalia Dache. I say your name in Spanish. We share so many wonderful, connections, Amalia. Special thanks, for you to returning to Rochester virtually, to be with all of us and share your knowledge and your wisdom. I had the honor of meeting you at the University of Pennsylvania in January as you were presenting your research about Rochester, which was a very unique experience for me to be in Philly and learning about Rochester and learning from you. So again, thank you very much. So Dr. Amalia Dache is an Afro-Cuban American scholar and an assistant professor of higher education division within the Grad School of Education at the University of Pennsylvania. So that's another thing that we share. As a hometown resident of Rochester, Dr. Dache attended the Rochester City School District from K through 12, and also went to Monroe Community College, the College of Rockport, and the Empire State College, and the University of Rochester Warner School of Education, and where she earned a PhD in 2014. At the University of Rochester, she conducted her first research study on the special racial factors of college access for residential communities living in Rochester. I think that this is just such a perfect time, for you to share your knowledge around your research with all of us here at the University of Rochester. This study, as Noah mentioned, was recognized, with the Association of the Study of Higher Education Bobby Wright Dissertation of the Year Award in 2014. So I am so pleased, to introduce you to Dr. Amalia Dache, and I look forward to her lecture and to the discussion. Thank you very much. Dr. Dache.
Thank you. I will be sharing my screen. One moment. So good evening, Rochester community. Thank you all for joining me today in this virtual format that I know we both have a love and hate relationship with at this point in the semester and academic year. I would like to thank the University of Rochester's Office of Alumni Relations and Office of Diversity and Inclusion, especially Mercedes, Karen and her wonderful team, and Adrian for their coordination and planning for this event. I would also like to acknowledge the indigenous land of the Finger Lakes region that we are in, of the Iroquois, the Seneca, Cayuga, Tuscarora, and Onondaga. Concurrently with the land, I would like to acknowledge the waterways and the forced migration of African people to the region, along with the voluntary migration of immigrant laborers and Caribbean Latino populations for their toiling and service to the lands and the institutions that surround us. With that, I want to do some housekeeping. So I want to acknowledge that I have no conflicts of interest, financial or otherwise, with the University of Rochester. And then I just want to start by discussing really briefly my history of research in urban education, in particular to access, and give some context to the breadth of the college access study I'll be talking about today. So to the left of your screen, you have an image of a house. That is the house I grew up in the northeast side of Rochester, near East Avenue, near East Main Street, near East High School. So northeast side. And today's focus focuses on this area of my neighborhood, of this geography that really influenced my thinking as far as my research. And it's where I lived from the time I was in second grade through the time I enrolled at MCC. And so as you will see with the study that I present today, the focus on proximity and spatial racial diversity of college campuses and residential communities are really salient to where I grew up and where I lived for most of my life in Rochester. The next study that I conducted was in Ferguson, Missouri, where I focused on looking at the Ferguson uprising and seeing the Ferguson uprising as a form of public education, and also acknowledging that students and college students were trying to diversify their universities and have more local Black enrollment in their universities across the state of Missouri and were involved in the Ferguson movement. In Cape Town, I studied South African student movements as well, the Rhodes Must Fall movement, and looked at the changing landscape through the decolonization efforts of these students. In Havana, I'm looking similarly at access to higher education for Cubans. And in particular, there's a large Afro-Cuban component of my sample. And then lastly, I am conducting a study very recently, as of this year. I was funded by the National Academies and Spencer Foundation to do work on public housing and college access in Philadelphia. And so why should we study access? So for me, this was the basis of one of the reasons why I looked at space, this issue of the pipeline. So when I'm pointing, what I'm pointing here to is three groups in particular that tend to be overrepresented in urban communities: African Americans or Black population, Latinos, Latinx, and Latinos that are foreign born. And this is out of 100 students that start in elementary school, the next number is how many actually get to high school, and then how many actually get to earn a bachelor's degree, a graduate degree, and a doctorate. And as you can see, there's discrepancies across these three groups, in particularly Blacks, Latinos, and Latinos that are foreign born. And so they're underrepresented within higher education in the US. And that's one of the main rationales why I focus on urban access of these three populations. And an overview of the literature, really quick, focuses on the individual student characteristics and also family and school context. But what I focus on primarily is the external campus climate. So the external context that shapes government policy, the socio-historical forces within municipalities and cities that contribute to access and access discourses for urban communities. So within this body of literature, I've published several pieces related to issues having to do with this concept of college desert and oasis. So I know many of you are familiar with this idea of the food desert. So similarly, and I'll talk about this in a couple of my data slides, I came up with the concept of college deserts and also the concept of oases, which is an overrepresentation of these institutions in particular communities. Also histories of uprising and histories of urban transit and access for communities that are also living in poverty and have lesser higher education attainment than other community members. I've also looked at the criminalization and racialization of urban branch campuses, similar to the ones that we are familiar with in Rochester, like the Damon City Center urban campus versus the main campus, and the discrepancies between access discourses and busing surrounding these two campuses. Also predatory targeting and urban Latinx proprietary institution recruitment, and how Latino populations are being targeted by for-profits. And we'll see that in the data as well. So I want to share a little bit about the Northeast side, some history that I didn't necessarily know until I started studying the history of Rochester when I was at University of Rochester. So even though I grew up in Rochester's Northeast side, I didn't even know this history. And so the US Census estimates that race groups from 1830 through 1990 were changing. So it is evident that Black and Latino populations began to increase from the 1940s and 1970s, and the white population simultaneously began to decrease. So ever since 1834, immigrants and working class were concentrated in the Northeast quadrant. So the Northeast quadrant has always been a quadrant in Rochester that has been working class and poor, even though the racial demographics changed in the last 100 years. So I thought that was particularly interesting. So you had German, Jewish immigrants that started arriving in the early 1900s. And then of course, in the Northeast area, also we had urban slums, African Americans, and Puerto Rican migration in the later part of the mid-century. So a city historian confirms how rents were higher for African Americans, although their conditions were very poor. So from the 1970s into 2000s, there was a 20% decrease in cities from 2.8 million to 2.3 million across the state of New York. And at the same time, suburban populations increased by 16%. So a lot of urban scholars considered this white flight, and also it affected Rochester as well. So here you have an image of public housing in Rochester, Los Flamboyanes, which is on Clinton Ave. And then you have the deindustrialization, an image of deindustrialization on Goodman Avenue in Rochester as well. And so this context really contributes to this socio-historical component of the external campus that we don't necessarily talk too much about in the college access literature, that I'm trying to bring attention to, because it still has implications for the access that we have in the contemporary component that we live in now in Rochester. And so here, what I also want to talk about is not necessarily just the issues of oppression and racial segregation and class division, but also there have been moments in the city of Rochester where you find cultural capital, right? So here you have small businesses in the north and northeast side, like botanicas and bodegas. And so it's important to know that there was a high percentage of Puerto Rican families in the northeast side that were owners of bodegas. And also the botanicas are areas of cultural capital that are based in Afro-Cuban traditions and religion that are really central in the spiritual community and the Latino community in Rochester, New York. So now, fun stuff, data. All you're gonna see for the next 10 minutes is data, data, data. But mapping data tends to be great because it's visual. So hopefully you can consume it pretty quickly and then discuss it in your groups. So what we have here is this concept I came up with called the College Desert and Oasis. We have Monroe County, and then we have the city of Rochester here in the middle. We know in the county, we have higher concentrations of white residents, while in the city, we have higher concentrations of African Americans. About 41% of the city is African American, and 16% is Latinx. While outside in the county, you have a 14% residents are living below the poverty line, and 31% of residents within the city are living below the poverty line. So you have, again, a dichotomy of class, race, and income status. Another component of this map is looking at the relocations of universities. So in the piece that some of you received as far as your facilitators, I discussed how the University of Rochester, when it was founded in 1850, was downtown in downtown Rochester. RIT was also in downtown Rochester in 1885. Nazareth was in the north side in 1924. And also Monroe Community College was also downtown until 1968. And so many of these colleges were in Central City or the Northeast, yet they moved to the South following trends in depopulation and following trends in white flight. What this map also shows is that at the center of the city, these are buffers. This is a 1 mile buffer, a 2 mile buffer, a 3 mile buffer, and a 4 mile buffer. And not until we get to the 3 mile buffer do you have the first college or post-secondary institution, which is a for-profit Everest Institute. And then you have the University of Rochester also here in the third and 3 miles. And these are the 3 colleges within the city of Rochester, one for profit, 1 community college, and then 1 highly selective doctoral granting institution. Everything outside the city of Rochester, you have a more diverse set of institutions. You have 2 private, not-for-profit institutions, Nazareth and St. John Fisher. You have a for-profit, and you also have a community college, and you also have RIT. So I consider this the College Oasis, where you have more colleges in proximity in areas that are predominantly white and have higher incomes. So another component of my research not only discusses proximity, but looking at actually the spatial racial relationships between institutions and where residents live. So here we have the spatial racial map of the Black population across the county. And so the concentrations of African Americans are shown here with the census tracts. So we can see that there's higher proportions of African Americans within the city of Rochester, in particular, Northeast, Northwest, and South and Southwest. And when you look at the enrollment at each institution and you look at the Black population, you can see there's very stark discrepancies, right? So you see that there's an enrollment range between 4% and 40%. And then the highest percentages are at for-profit colleges and universities. The BNS, which is Bryan and Stratton and Everest Institute, here have the highest percentages. About 40% of African Americans are enrolled there, and here as well. Whereas the lowest percentages are private not-for-profits. So University of Rochester, Fisher, and NAS have the lowest percentages, and these were based off of 2014 numbers of Black enrollment at these institutions. Looking at the Latinx, Latino population, you see similar trends with African Americans, although you have a smaller percent of enrollment. So their range is actually from 3%, 3.7% to 17% are enrolled at institutions across the county. Their highest percentages are similar to African Americans, private for-profits, Everest and BNS. And then the lowest percentages, again, are very similar to African Americans, private non-for-profits, St. John Fisher and SUNY Brockport are the ones that have the lowest percentages of Latinos. However, when you look at the white population, the enrollments range and their concentrations range. So they're almost dichotomous to the Black and Latino populations and their representations at colleges and universities. So what you see here is that in the center of the city, you have less concentrations of white residents, and you have a higher concentration of white residents across the county. When you look at the institutions and their demographics, the enrollments range from 35 to 85% white enrollment at institutions across the county. And their highest percentages are at private and public not-for-profit. So you have St. John Fisher and SUNY Brockport has the highest percentages of white enrollment. And their lowest enrollments are opposite to that of African American Latinos at private for-profit institutions at 35 and 42%. So I have been working with the Rockefeller Institute in the last year and to come up with a map to look at the Finger Lakes region, right? Extending kind of this analysis to looking at other counties, the other 8 counties. And so here I want to discuss quickly some preliminary data that I found within the Finger Lakes region, and you'll have more time to discuss these discrepancies within the rural context. And this integrated map is going to be available with a blog that I'll be writing related to this lecture and related to the new data. And so I'll make sure that the alumni office reaches out with those data, because this map is actually very, very important in thinking about policy within the municipalities within the Finger Lakes region and the role of institutions in diversifying their colleges and universities. So this is a preliminary look at what the map is going to look like. And when you look at the Black population across the region, the pockets of the most highly concentrated Black residents are in Livingston County, Wyoming, and Seneca, and have no post-secondary options within 5 miles of these residents. And so this is the Finger Lakes region, and these are concentrations of the Black population. And then this is their percentages across the institutions. This is Livingston County. And in Livingston County, one track has a 40% population, but all 3 colleges near that one track have no more than a 5% Black enrollment. So again, there's this mismatch between the residents and the campus enrollment in this case. And then census tracts across the Finger Lakes region outside of Monroe County with the highest concentrations of Black residents between 10 and 15% have only one post-secondary option within proximity. So that's really key. So it's another kind of manifestation of this college desert within the rural context. You still have only one college option within proximity, even though your residents are 10 to 15% African American. Okay, and here we're looking at the Latino population across the Finger Lakes region. So here we see that the census tracts with the most highly concentrated Latinx population are in Ontario County at 17 to 22%, Livingston and Wayne. Livingston County has the census tract with the most Latino population, and it's the same one as in the previous slide with the Black population. So it looks like the Black population, the Latino population in Livingston County kind of share similar demographics. Now in Wayne County, which is the map here above, the Latino and Black population in Wayne County have no colleges within 5 mile proximity. And the closest and only college in proximity is the one that you see here is FLCC, which is 10 miles away. Wayne County, so 2 tracks in Wayne County have a 12% Hispanic Latinx population, but the only college has a 5% Latinx enrollment. Again, a mismatch. Now in Ontario County, which is the other county that you see below Wayne County, unlike Livingston and Wayne, it has 8 post-secondary college options within proximity to Black and Latino populations. And the SUNY Empire State College branch has the highest college enrollments of Latinos and at any non-for-profit in the whole region, including Monroe County, which is 14%. But yet Ontario County, the one track that has 26%, and Marion Wheeling College, which is shown here, has only 4% Hispanic enrollment. So there's still levels of mismatch between the concentrations and the representations at the institution. So Ontario County is doing a much better job of serving Latino residents than counties across the region, including Monroe County, which has the highest concentrations of Latinos. So this finding is important and has really important implications on how we may think about how other counties can be serving these residents the way that Ontario County seems to be serving Latino residents. So my last map here is on Wayne County, and I'm looking here just looking at poverty. So I'm not looking at race and ethnicity, although I've talked about Wayne County in reference to the Latino population and the African-American population. But what's really interesting here is that Wayne County, out of all the counties, has the highest rates of poverty and is the county with the least amount of college options in the region. So as you can see here, Wayne County only has the Finger Lakes Community College. So Wayne County has a branch campus of Finger Lakes on the periphery county line shared with Ontario County, which has 3 other Finger Lake Community College branch campuses and private college options. Wayne County is a county in need of improvement when providing post-secondary access for their residents in most need of educational attainment, Latinos, Black, and those living in poverty. And so Wayne County shows here that the track up to 19% of people below poverty and 35% of their students are receiving financial aid. So there are a third of their students do receive financial aid, which in this variable is through the Pell Grant, and 19% are below the poverty line. So this seems to be a pretty positive variable. So to conclude, my studies reveal that there are spatial racial relationships between where colleges are located, their enrollment, and the enrollment demographics and the residential composition. And in the Finger Lakes region and in Monroe County, the historical remnants of residential segregation, suburbanization, depopulation continue to contribute to what residents are viewed as potential college students and what residents aren't viewed as college students in both urban and rural context. And so I'm thinking about this concept called representative democratic merit, which comes from the idea of Adriana Kazar on the responsibility and public good of universities, and also what Lanny Gunier describes as democratic merit. So I'm thinking about representative democracy and democratic merit together and thinking about moving forward, how should we start conceptualizing the importance of spatialization, race, and local opportunities for residents. So representative democracies like the US, its states and municipalities should have a more balanced representation of their local residents across racial, ethnic, and SCS lines, and at their local non-for-profits and post-secondary institutions. And so I think if we were to conceptualize democratic merit with this representation component, we could be doing a much better job of serving our residents and the community members around us. Thank you.